Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here back at T2F, and this time it's with Sadia Abbas, a very distinguished scholar and a writer. Uh, so we are really grateful that the T2F is hosting this and has organized it and enabled everybody to be here. This novel, which is being launched here, is called The Empty Room. This is Sadia Abbas's second book. Her first book, you can see, is about At Freedom's Limit, is a scholarly work about post-colonial moment that we are passing through. And The Empty Room is her novel, which she's been working on for quite some time, and she'll tell you more when you have a chance to interact with her. And her most recent publication is in this volume called the Post-Colonial Contemporary. Am I right? Okay. In which she's written an essay which kind of expands the post-colonial theory, and certainly we'll talk more about it once we talk to Sadia. I had the privilege and pleasure to look at the manuscripts of The Empty Room when Sadia was putting them together. And it was certainly a delight and a surprise that a novel of such sensitive and delicate writing was coming out. And I kept on telling her that it's extraordinary. And of course, we had a lot of debate on certain points and certain junctures, and that's how Sadia is. The novel is located in 1970s Karachi. So there's a very particular time period, a location, and a certain underlying sense of both historical and political tension, which the narrative brings forth to the reader, but in a very subtle way. It's not an overtly political novel. It's what one would call for the want of a better word, a domestic novel which deals with the intimate lives of characters, particularly female characters set in this particular time period of Karachi. And the protagonist, Tahira, is just a symbol of many other, maybe millions of women across the subcontinent and perhaps the globe, who get into unhappy marriages, and then they try and negotiate with their circumstances and with both the desire for freedom and the respect for convention and and to keep their families happy. And it is within these constraints that Tahira tries and finds her own voice, her own sensibility, her own expression. She's an artist who's given up artwork, and then she reclaims her talents and starts painting again. And the characters around her are again very varied. Her husband, who is Shehzad, is a typical Pakistani young man who is obviously, as a creature of patriarchy, has a certain expectation from his wife as a husband and a son-in-law, but he's not a villain, and he's not portrayed as such, which is again a very unique thing about this novel, that the characters have enough nuances, and there are no heroes and no villains in my view. But the underlying setting of the novel is even more important, because we don't have enough documentation or chronicles that put together the turbulent decade of 1970s, because 1970 is the time when Pakistan broke into, when Pakistan lost its eastern wing, a new country emerged. We also had a civilian government, an autocratic government under Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and all that happened in that time period has not been properly chronicled. And this novel, it kind of presents and is a very valuable document, other than its literary and fictional qualities, that it brings this particular phase of Pakistani history alive to the reader. And in particular, the repression of political workers, of progressives under an ostensibly secular socialist regime, and the peculiarities of Karachi's ethnic tensions. They also come forth, again in a very subtle way. There are hardly any political statements. The characters don't make long political speeches, but they do talk about the world outside, and they are living in a particular moment. So I think that's what I really liked about this novel. And I also think that it is very important that we kind of move away from the trends that we have. A lot of fiction in South Asia, particularly, and not just in Pakistan, but elsewhere, also caters to somehow the audience which is going to read it. And that kind of imposes many constraints, unfortunately. And this novel is liberated from that imperative. And it is and that's what it makes. That's what it makes its inherent creativity even more admirable. So I think I'll end there, and maybe Sadia Abbas, due to the recent circumstances, has partially lost her voice. So the reading that she was supposed to do this evening, I have been entrusted to do that, and I do apologize that I'm likely to make mistakes because I haven't rehearsed or tried, but please bear with me. So I'll read the opening paragraph and a few more passages from this novel, just to give you an idea. Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I've completely lost my voice, but can you hear me? All right, so I don't normally sound like this. I sound assertive and dominating, but today I just sound flimsy. I don't know for how long, but I will take questions later. I do want to thank Raza, who has flown out from Lahore just for this event. Sometimes I want to curse him because he insists that I must engage with all the time. And I'm a rather reclusive person. So I get scolding phone calls and emails from Raza saying that I have to update my Facebook page or my academic page, and then I kick and scream and tell him that he doesn't understand me. But I'm very grateful for his support. Also, I met him at a dinner party at Dr. Azra Raza's, and I was trying to run away from someone who was there and who was very tedious. And I just met Raza for the first time, and he was such a breath of fresh air that I followed him around the party. And we became very dear friends. So thank you. Thank you to Shazia Sikandar, who's a very dear friend of mine, who's flown out to Karachi for the day, for this event. We're very close in New York, and it's very lovely to have her in my city. And thank you to Saima Zaidi, who's a new friend, I hope, who agreed to do this. We've only met a couple of times before, but I'm hoping that she'll become one of the people that I see regularly in Karachi. And of course, then to my mother's friends for turning out with flowers to welcome me back to the city. I think it's the eventfulness of the event that made me lose my voice. But here I am. Thank you very much.
Eventfulness of the event that rendered you speechless, may I add? Okay, so I'll try. And so this is the opening paragraph. The terse knock on the door the morning after the wedding allowed Tahira to open her eyes. She had been lying very still, worrying that her eyelids might flicker and betray her waking state to Shehzad, who lay next to her, unmoving, perhaps because he too was trying to feign sleep. After a perfunctory pause in which she grabbed the gharara by the side of her bed and rushed to the bathroom, freed from the paralysis that had kept her under the sheets, pretending to be asleep, and in which Shehzad pulled on his trousers in a quick and complicated maneuver, all four of his sisters, Shaista, Asma, Farah, and Nazneen, entered the bedroom and sat themselves on and around the bed to talk with their brother. So that's how it opens. And a passage that I'm going to read from later part of the novel. He had summoned her away from his mother, who was quizzing her on her family's way of cooking bhindi, tut-tutting with exaggerated horror at the lack of refinement evinced by the addition of tomatoes. She hoped with deep, faint concern that Tahira would learn more civilized ways soon. Tahira said nothing. He told her to come upstairs, stern and self-important. She followed him, fearful, conscious of Shirin's intrusive prurience, of Nazneen and Farah, back from university, observing his demeanor with gleeful complicitous spite. They tried to follow him upstairs. He said, later. But bhai, Nazneen was smooth as an oil spill. We've missed you all day. We've so looked forward to sitting with you. Not now. It's something important and private. He smiled to soften his rejection. I'll be down soon. Shirin had started to follow immediately. She stopped and went into the kitchen. Tahira's fear grew as she followed him. In their bedroom, he had motioned her to sit on the bed, placing himself in an armchair by the window. He cleared his throat and then paused for maximal oratorical and, he told himself, moral effect. The education of another human being, the very salvation of many, including himself, dependent upon what he would do next. He cleared his throat again. Tahira could feel her heart beating very loudly, like the heroine of a bad Urdu film, she thought, trying to calm herself. She racked her brain, trying to fathom what she could have done, feeling the silence stretch and shrink, rise and fall, its own ghostly accordion, audibly punctuated, she was certain, by her own very loud heartbeat. Perhaps he would send her back. Your parents, he began, and then paused to clear his throat for the third time. Tahira waited. Your parents, he began again with conscious, and he concluded fitting gravity, have been deficient in your upbringing. We must overcome this shortcoming. I will teach you your duties, but not deny your conjugal rights, which are my religious duty as well. Tahira felt the already familiar tears begin to gather in her eyes. She bit the inside of her mouth, clenching the hand that lay on the blue velvet and lace bedspread. The lace caught on her rings. Shahzad reached for his briefcase, opening it with ostentatious ceremony. The occasion had to reflect his magnanimity of spirit. The back of the textured black patent leather case blocked her vision. He shut the briefcase with an officious snap and handed her a square package wrapped in green paper with a tessellated pattern of mauve and yellow triangles. May I open it? Her smile was sweet with relief and gratitude. He nodded his head, solemn and stern, wincing a little at her smile. She unwrapped the present with her habitual meticulousness and felt rather than saw him nod his head approvingly. It was a book. She saw the title and tried to mask her incredulous disappointment. At that moment, Shirin knocked and, without waiting for a response, entered the room. Tahira jumped up, grateful for the distraction. She hurried to take the tray, setting the present aside with what she hoped would not be recognized as relieved and indecorous haste. Shahzad snapped, "Not now, Ammi Jaan." Shirin slid a quick, surreptitious glance at the bed, saw the wrapping paper and looked down, struggling to hide her annoyance. She left the room apologizing profusely. "I'm sorry, I disturbed you, beta. I didn't mean to intrude. I only came upstairs because you looked so tired. And I know how much you like your tea as soon as you come back from work." She smiled blandly at Tahira. Her words hung in the air, portents of greater, more tragic disappointments to come. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I would have brought up the tea," Tahira said. Shahzad interrupted. "We are in the middle of an important conversation, Ammi Jaan. Not now." Shirin left, scowling with fury and humiliation. "May I pour you some tea?" He nodded. She handed him the cup, holding it with tense and careful grace. "I gave you the book because I'm concerned about your character. A wife must conduct herself with decorum and propriety at all times. She must be the ornament of a family. She must uphold, by example, the very highest ideals of virtue. Indeed, she must. He paused, aware that he was about to make a dangerous but necessary concession. Even be the source of her husband's virtue. His conduct is a moral reflection of her goodness. She must at all times make it possible. He continued to speak, embroidering the importance of fulfilling a husband's expectations, ordained about the horrors that could befall a wife who was not always on guard against failures of decorum and propriety, grace and virtue. He described with eloquent, shuddering horror, frightening even himself, what happened to men who had thoughtless wives who could not divine their husband's desires from the angle of his eyebrow, the curl of his lip, the blankness of his eyes. Such husbands were unfortunate, he proclaimed, investing the word with the thunderous power of destiny, the judgment of fate that exposed profound, culpable, well-deserving evil. Hell-deserving evil. Such misfortune was attained that drenched the bearer, and all that she touched with shame. He saw his own life and career lost, destroyed through no moral failing of his own. He spoke of what could become of her in such circumstances, of the way the world would witness her condition with public mockery, derision, the most humiliating contempt. When Tahira tried to speak, to reassure or just agree, he spoke louder and faster until she subsided. He ignored a knock on the door and continued about the future of their children, her salvation, the entire family's fate on the day of judgment. Hell lay gaping and exposed at her feet. Laughter overheard by a neighbor, walking too fast. Neglected children, a husband insulted by less than immaculate crockery, by not being waited for at the dinner table, all merged into a vision so apocalyptic, Tahira began to see Shehzad and their children, as yet imaginary, engulfed in the fires of hell, reproaching her as their flesh blackened and crisped and smoked in eternal torment. But slowly, without quite knowing how, even as Shehzad rose and fell in the grip of his own vivid eloquence, she found she couldn't concentrate. Her mind wandered. She was glad that the obligatory downward cast of her eyes allowed her to veil the slow creep of a numbing boredom. She stared at his shoes, which glistened, immaculate and polished, the crease of his trousers, like the edge of his most prized razors, the carpet on the floor, black and patterned with dull and dirty blue flowers, which she would remember later and learn to be distantly related to William Morris's patterns, themselves based on South Asian designs. She must get rid of it, she thought. It only added to the gaudy and oppressive gloom of the room. And then she was surprised by the boldness of the thought. She realized that she was hungry and hoped they would be called to dinner soon. Perhaps Shireen would summon her to help prepare it. It did not occur to Shehzad that he had lost his audience or that he could. I end. So I'll ask Saima to say a few words about the book, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Go back to the page that you just opened.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you so much. A couple of things that strike me across while I was reading this book is Tahira, and you were also reading out, Tahira said nothing.
Yeah.
And her words hung in the air. And the feeling, the silence.
Yes.
Oh,
You might pass it.
feeling the silence. There was that paragraph on how she could hear her heartbeat.
Yes.
It's all right. We can. So when I was reading this book, and after, there was a real sense. It's a difficult book to read. It's a beautiful book, but it's very difficult to read. And the empty room is pregnant with suppressed silence. The silence of resentment, the silence of frustration, the silence of unfulfilled desires. And Sadia Abbas, and we were talking about this just before we came here, the interesting part about this novel is that she allows for the transparency of the emotional landscape of the characters in the novel for the reader. So the reader is always aware of the emotions of the characters. Yet, the characters themselves do not. And that's how she builds the suspense, Abbas. For us through these explosive dynamics amongst these characters, which are also, of course, a byproduct of the bottled up feelings. The novel, as Raza was just talking about, the primary female protagonist, Tahira Hassan, she's an artist and she's also an avid reader who basically acquiesces to a marriage, an arranged one, by her parents, and at the ripe age, old age of 21. So she's thoroughly ignorant of the expectations of married life, and also navigating her taciturn husband, Shehzad. And Tahira somehow finds herself in a very claustrophobic and hostile marital home. And in fact, the women she encounters include her mother-in-law, and of course, this is the whole Saas Bahu trajectory playing out, except in a very, as you said, nuanced way, the mother-in-law who seeks to perpetuate the cycle of violence she faced in her own marriage, right? And that we see that even now, unfortunately, I'm not talking about us, but I'm talking generally speaking. And then, of course, this domestic politics is further aggravated.
You might be talking about us. But for the purpose of this conversation, she's not.
But the domestic politics is further aggravated by her territorial and interfering sisters-in-law. So I won't give more than that away, obviously. What also comes into play is the politics of ownership, which is a underlying leitmotif, I would imagine. Tahira cannot even bring herself to address her husband by his name. So the story is really about loss, displacement, isolation, and as you very rightfully pointed out, loneliness. Now let's just shift our gaze to the male, the Shehzad, the husband. And he is, of course, a man of contradictions. So he has his orthodox views, for instance, Bahishti Zevar, and he's teaching her how to behave in a certain way which reflects well on him, and it's all about him, really. It is.
Not surprisingly.
The tea set must not be forgotten. And however, he also obviously covers it. This is all covered by a veneer, veneer of progressive education, work. We know that he travels. In fact, he even, surprisingly enough, decides to take her off to London with her, which was to the disconcert. They were very distressed, the in-laws. Moving on, one of the characters I would love to talk about, and I really, really, really loved her, was Andaleep. Andaleep is this fiery woman. She's Tahira's childhood friend. And in fact, she very, very nicely, you provide a very lovely gateway to Tahira's premarital personality through Andaleep. And she's really a breath of fresh air. If Raza Rumi was a breath of fresh air for Sadia Abbas at that dinner, in the book, we've got Andaleep doing this, because she talks, you talked very refreshingly about her laughter, that observation of her loud laughter, which is almost something that you refer to as brave in the book. So this is an independent woman, but again, I would like to underscore that Certainly she is independent, that's her personality. However, this is also enabled by her family. So it is a sort of, they all play off of each other. I will leave Safdar to you because I actually loved the whole political part very much. No, I think you'll be much better at it. No. Anyhow, what I would sort of put it in a nutshell, the burden of society, I think we all realize, is placed squarely on the shoulders of women. And despite the fact that this is a novel which is set in the early 1970s, it is unfortunately still resonating with the majority of women, and as you said very rightfully, globally. So it's not just a Pakistani syndrome. And this concept of sacrifice, I think it's high time. I mean, I probably shouldn't be saying this. It's high time that we actually it must be sacrificed. The sacrifice of the sacrifice. Again, coming back, I think the gut-wrenching honesty of Sadia Abbas's prose really pulls the reader into the world that she has painted. Her characters are not built on pure description. In fact, through strokes of emotion, light, conflict. And as indicated by the title, Abbas emphasizes the spaces of the characters inhabit through richly textured and vivid colors, the glistening shoes, the dull or the dirty painted, blue painted carpet. Finally, and I really like this line, please love it. In fact, each character is trapped in this empty room. Thank you.
So I think we can just open it up for Q&A, enabling all of you to ask a question about the book, about the author, her work, her fiction.
Some questions about the author. Just be careful.
No, let them. I'm sure people want to know. For those who don't know you, so. Ji. Yeah. Yeah, I want
Hi, and I just want to say that I won't ask a question about the author because I actually know the author
Yes.
from college, from Wellesley College, where we both attended, and I can say that Sadia was somebody of ferocious intellect.
Wow.
Really, honestly, she says that she was a very assertive. She is a very assertive, she has an assertive voice, and that was clear even back then in those days, and I'm talking early 90s. She just had this brilliant mind, and she had this fearless way of projecting her intellect and being curious about the world. It's no surprise to me that she's established herself as a post-colonial critic of not small measure. Her reputation is known in the world. I have friends who are quite frightened of her, actually, of her work.
Okay.
Of her work.
Tell us more.
No, she's a fearless intellectual and a fearlessly brave scholar and woman, I think. And so if that doesn't convince you to buy the book, then I have failed. But my question is, well, that's not a question, it's more of a comment, because obviously I haven't read the book, although I read the extract that is available on Amazon, where it's the night after the wedding and the sisters just barge in and she can't do anything about it. And I just saw today somebody had posted on Twitter a very sort of an analysis of the dynamic, the very sick dynamic that many marriages tend to have, which is where a woman enters into a marriage like this, is totally unsatisfied, and turns her son into her surrogate husband. And then that man marries a woman who is then made miserable, and then she turns her son into the surrogate husband. And it just goes, well, I think we all are quite familiar with this dynamic. We see it so much on our television. We've seen it in our houses around us. I wanted to ask if some of that dynamic is playing out in the book, and in your opinion, what is the answer in Pakistani society to putting a halt to that dynamic? Because otherwise it's just a cyclical form of emotional abuse, I think, of women that goes on, that self-perpetuates. Thank you.
The book doesn't sort of takes that on, but not entirely. No, actually does. The mother-in-law has that, actually. And yeah, I call it the lateral relation. That's how I've always explained it, right? So there's this displaced desire across generations, and our family structures are entirely shaped by them, right? And I mean, some of it is just a basic mother-daughter, mother-son, father-daughter relationship that you see everywhere in the world. Desire, it's very edible. It's very edible. But it requires a certain systemic force, I think, in our society, right? Because it's actually made into a part of the social structure. I'm always very uncomfortable answering questions about what we should do. And I'll tell you why. I don't live here. I left 30 years ago. I went to college. I decided I wasn't going to stay there. I wanted to come back. But while you guys were seeing this ferocious intellect at Wellesley, I was tortured. And part of that was because I didn't want to stay there. And I didn't know what to do with the fact that I was utterly compelled to study literature. Like, I couldn't do anything else. Like, right? It was so false to me. And my parents are here, but that's okay, I've said it elsewhere, so I'm going to say it here too. And I was sent, and my khala's here too. And they all said, Sochna bhi mat angrezi karne ka. Because everybody knew I was in O-level, in my ONA levels. Kam se kam economics hi kar lena. And my darling father, who has completely changed his view now, actually said to me when I got into the English department at Berkeley, if you come to your senses, beta law hi kar lo. Right? It's okay. But I'm also fully like a product of my father, because we banter and fight and argue. And so that's very much part of the structure, right? But in some sense, that's the historical moment, right? My friend Farooq Khan, who is now the director of English at LUMS, was nodding fiercely when I was saying this in Lahore. He was told the same thing, ye nahi karna, kya karoge, naukri nahi milegi. But there was a truth to that, and I wasn't socially stupid, right? And I wanted to be, more than anything else, fiercely independent, right? And I've been economically independent since 23, right? This is just a fact. So what I wanted was to do what I wanted to do, but I also wanted to be able to earn on my own, at least to be able to support myself, right? So I didn't want to come back here because usat kuch nahi tha. I mean, LUMS hadn't even started really, right? Even LUMS was barely there, right? So what was I going to do? So my entire sophomore year, I didn't sleep because it was such a tough decision. And I just didn't have a choice. I mean, choice in the sense I had a choice, but it was a compulsion. I wanted to do this so badly, right? And writing is a compulsion, right? And in fact, my partner says to me that I'm unbearable when I'm not working. He says, you're not writing anything right now, aren't you? Because you're a bear. Just go, do something. So I am a workaholic and I love it, right? So what was I going to do? And so I decided to stay. And then, of course, things happened, right? And then, you fall in love, you stay there, things happen, And so, and I say that particularly also because America was not a space of freedom. It was a space of work in some ways. And it was a space of work in the way that, and I said this in Lahore as well, imperial centers often are. Imperial centers like Baghdad, think about it, they attract scholars. And I am also fundamentally a scholar, right? I love it, right? And so people ask me, and Raza is one of them, come on, choose. You got to stick with the literature. I said, no, there's no bifurcation. I am a cultural theorist, and I love that work. You give me anything I'm working on, I'll get into that deeply, right? So I'm giving a long answer, but I think it explains a lot. So I stayed, and then, and America was then, as I say to the Americans, who all want to believe, especially and including my liberal friends, that they liberated me. I'm like, dude, I migrated into downward mobility. That's all that happened. What I did get was great libraries. Not so much at Rutgers, but great, or as another Puerto Rican friend of mine says, great interlibrary loan, right? So that's what we did. So it became about work, and I love it. Now it also happens to be the case that I now work at Rutgers University, Newark, which is the most diverse campus in America, and is economically diverse as well. And that's a space where there are working class black students, there are Latinx students, and 10% Muslim students, even though we're not allowed to collect our data. So, and I work very closely with those students, right? I've done more mentoring than you can imagine on everything from divorce to abusive parents, because many of these kids live at home, to, just like little things. Who should I marry? What should I do? That kind of thing. And I do a lot of that personal stuff because I get it. And I considered not completing this novel. I started it many years ago. It was lying in a drawer. I started at Freedom's Limit after that, wrote it from scratch because I needed to get tenure. Finished that, and the minute I got tenure, I took Empty Room out of the drawer and completed it, right? But before that, I'd had conversations with my students because I didn't want this book to become what I call part of the Muslim woman carnival in the West, right? So it's not been published in the West, right? So I thought about not completing it and not publishing it. I mean, it's available. And I asked my students, should I? Come on, let's have an honest conversation about this. Because I'm not that kind of artist, too much of a post-colonialist. So I don't think that art has its own kind of liberatory logic. That's just me, I'm not advocating. So my students actually said, and they're mentioned at the end, especially this lovely young Palestinian student, Nada, whom I adore, you have to finish this, because we're still living this, right? Bashti Zevar is still given to students in New Jersey, or to young women in their dowries today across Pakistan and India, but also in New Jersey, right? And so those students then became the benchmark for me of what I felt compelled to do, which is not to make myself a heroic figure, but that's my politics and that's my investment. So I finished it, and then I got a couple of inane comments from editors, right? Like, for instance, the opening isn't oppressive enough. I'm like, jab tak kode na pade aapko to oppression nahi hai, I don't understand. So I was like, I can't deal with this. And that's the moment, and I was saying in Lahore, ki thoda dimag mein keeda bhi hai, right? I was like, I'm not going to publish it, it's too much work. So मैं Greece में बैठी हूँ doing research on my next academic book. And I'm calling my friend Biju Matthew, the great Indian leftist, who's a very dear buddy of mine. And I say, yaar nahi karna, bas bahut ho gayi. Dimag kharab ho raha hai, I can't read these. And I'm an English professor, and I'm having to talk about this. Like seriously, like 24 years I've been teaching literature. Do I really have to do this? And so he's like, nahi, just wait. And then Urvashi Patalia got a copy of the book. And to my generation of scholars, Urvashi's a heroine, right? She started the Kali Press for women, and she was the great first feminist press in South Asia. I mean, she's an icon, this leftist feminist, right? And I was like, oh my God, it's Urvashi. Are you kidding? And then she said she loved the book, she read it very quickly. And I was like, oh my God, you can just have it. Just take it, publish it, whatever, you can have it. And she said, we don't have the money, and we can't give you anything. Money nahi, aap le le. Please, le lijiye. Aapko pasand aa gayi, aap kuch kar lein iske saath, right? And there are emails to this also. And so she took it, right? And I'll get royalties at some point, but it was very important to me, right? For this book. The next book that I'm writing, if it gets completed and it's not crap, it's about British colonialism. As I say, I'll happily sell that to the Goras. And in fact, I'll auction it and they should read about themselves. This conversation I felt we needed to have, right? So then the question is what to do, right? I don't know. Because again, I don't live here. I walked away from that. So I live a completely different life. I don't care. मुझसे लोग कहते हैं आप तलाक शुदा हैं, But even in Pakistan, in America, there are South Asians who meet you and they're like, oh my God, you poor thing. I'm like, dude, I'm having a good time. Do I look unhappy to you? Nay. But they go into condolence mode and you're just looking at them like, no, you don't understand. I'm having a really good time. I'm doing what I love doing. And I have great friends. What do I do with that? So for me, I think that the best one can do, and again, I hate giving advice, but I think the best one can do is actually just live. Just do it. Right? But there's going to be a lot of crap. There's no getting around it. It's going to come from all directions. And it's not like the gender stuff is going to end when you get to the West either. So it's like the gender and racial stuff that I encounter at work, the Islamophobia, it's all there, right? And the more successful you get in the American university, the worse it gets, right? Because you're no longer an object of patronage, right? Suddenly you're a contender. When they read my tenure letters, I got more hostility. It's like, wow. Because they were like, they're awesome letters. So suddenly there's no gunjaish ना कि आप उनको कहें कि हमने आपको बहुत फेवर किया है, हमारी color coding ठीक हो गई, अब देख थोड़े brown लोग भी ले आए, right? And then that's when I get arrogant. And I'm like, dude, I'm better than you. Right? So I do that. But the racism is there. And the gendered stuff is there. It's just got a different inflection. So in that sense, I have to say opportunistically, that the way I navigate it is I always have this in my head too. Right? And that's privilege. What I say to somebody who doesn't have privilege, I don't know. What I try to do is I work as intensely as I can with my students to help them in any way to navigate this. Not to tell them what to do. But if they want to do something different, I'll be there. That's...
Okay, so, yeah, Huri.
So Sadia, coming from what you said about
Sure.
it's important for this book to be published from this region, what about having it translated into Urdu?
Get me a translator, I'll give it to you right now. Honestly. I'd love to have it translated.
It's so good.
Qasim, tum karoge? Nahi can't get it, sorry. No, she
But
may not
yes,
want
yes.
to.
I mean, one can look
I
for
would
a
love to.
translator, yes.
I would love to. Absolutely. I would love to have it translated in Urdu.
Because I seriously think that all these wonderful writers writing in English
I think so too,
need
yeah.
to be translated into Urdu.
Yeah, and I think we've got great writers in English right now. I've written about some of them, and I want to be very clear, at the tail end of things that others have done, right? And this generation of writers that is produced, I'm very, I'm indebted to them because they did it first. It wasn't me, right? So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. My fantasy was, and if my Urdu were good enough, I would have done this, was to bring out a dual language text. That's the biggest compliment you could give me.
मैं बिल्कुल लग रहा था कि मैं घर पे सुन रही हूँ ये ज़बान
मेरे लिए
और ये ख़यालात खुसूसन
मेरे लिए सबसे बड़ा जो चैलेंज था ना उस वक्त एंड ये था कि वो जो उर्दू की एक केडेंस होती है वो अंग्रेजी में कैसे आएगी because this is not my voice, right? And it took such discipline क्योंकि मेरे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी था, right? And it was an Urdu speaking voice of a particular Muslim Ashraf culture. That's what I wanted. So if you got it, that's great. And it was for me, because what I didn't want was this, hi, sweetie, because that's not how we speak. You know what I mean? I don't talk like that, and my family doesn't talk. I grew up in an Urdu font family. So, I wouldn't want it, and I love that language. So for me, it was like, how do you get that?
Yeah. How did that speaks and it's so controlled how she expresses herself. The control of expression that is so Urdu, that is so Ashrafia Urdu.
The biggest compliment anybody could give me, because मेरे लिए ये था कि लाइक एज आप जानती हैं मुझे बचपन से, बहुत कुछ लोग यहाँ पे जानते हैं, आई एम अ काइंड ऑफ मूव-part dramatic person, right? And Tahira's like no one. I'm like, she's so repressed, she's so controlled, but not repressed in some Freudian sense. She's repressed in the way that Jahara in Aakhir Shab Ke Humsafar might be, or one of those characters. So the question is, in that kind of UP, self-mutilated silence, right? Was so important to me. So how do you do that? And then I have to say, because since you brought up Andaleep, right? So Andaleep, and I found it really hard because it's hard to write a book like that because you're stuck and you want to get out, you want some air. And Andaleep sort of catapulted over the wall, literally, in that book, right? And she kind of became like an outlet for me also. And also she's very much part of it too. But I fell in love with her. And she became her own character. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I just want to know, what was your relationship with the brother? I mean, how does that come through with you, with an understanding of how men think and how you get that support and don't get it, both ways, where...
I love Waseem. I mean, I love them all, actually. And even Shahzad, I think, is a very lonely character, right? He's heartbreakingly lonely because he has certain notions of how he should be treated in a kind of conjugal relationship.
He should treat also.
And how he should treat also. And it's all like a prior script.
Yeah.
So for me, the engagement with Urdu literature is very serious because I started reading Bahishti Zevar. And I realized, oh my God, there's so much of this I've heard. And then I started reading Miratul Arus, or The Mirror of Brides. And I was like, my God, these are these kind of entwined paradigms. And then I was reading, Ghalib, of course, but Ghalib, for his abstraction. Because English, I'm a Renaissance scholar, right? I'm a trained Miltonist and in love with Marvell. And suddenly, I'm having to do this very abstract language, right? Which Urdu poetry is full of. So that became very important. But then also there's a moment at the beginning where वो कहते हैं कि the line सी के लब एक क़यामत से उठा दी जाए. There's a literal translation in the first chapter. Right? The power of, not literal, a poetic translation. The power of apocalypse granted to sealed lips. Right? That's the line in my head. Right? So I'm hearing Urdu while I'm writing it. But Waseem then becomes really interesting to me because it's about, it's about the fact that there are so many people in the society who want something different at every class level, including the men. But how do you affect change? And this is where the leftist in me comes out, right? How do you actually affect change when the systemic possibilities are not available? So you can't just it's not an individual rebellion, right? Individual rebellion means you accept a certain kind of isolation and loneliness. But I love the multi-generational character of our lives. And for those of us, Shazia and I were talking about this yesterday, moving into another country is like a deafening silence. It's lonely because we're used to these houses where people come and go.
One question, did you feel that you affected the change?
Of course not.
Okay.
Who am I?
No. In the book.
Affected the change for a character?
Yes, of life, of how you look at life.
In myself or in the...
In the book, whether the character did.
आप बताइए, आपने किताब पढ़ी है? So, but then I'll tell you too.
ये कहना इसलिए कि मैं तुमसे इसी वजह से पूछ रही हूँ पहले कि तुम बताओ कि तुम्हें ऐसा लगा कि तुम इसलिए कि हमारे यहाँ the oldest of the generations did affect change. ऐसे ही नहीं आ जाता. I heard, for example, I'll tell you a little story. My mother-in-law was also my aunt. She's amazing, really. मगर वो एक दिन कहने लगी कि अगर नाली के कीचड़ से भी निकाल करके एक पुतला बनाए और उससे शौहर कह दें तो सीना तान के खड़ा हो जाएगा. तो ये beautiful.
So
this is a very strongly feminist woman. And she was very happy the way she led her life, but she used all the quirks that were in her and her sense of humor to manipulate, to change, to affect change. I mean, I feel that each one of them have affected change, and there's strong feminists who have done it. So that's how I saw them. Now, I'm asking you, this is why, did you feel this way?
About the characters.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I don't know. That's a great question, and I'm, you know, I mean, something shifts in Tahira, and I'm interested in the shift.
Yes.
You know, I'm really interested in that shift.
Change, nahi, that is a more correct, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a development, but the novel is not a Bildungsroman at all. In fact, I was talking to David Lloyd on the radio the other day, and he said, you know, and then afterwards we had a conversation on the phone, and he said, it's not a it is and it's not, right? But I was trying to subvert the conventions of the Bildungsroman too, because that's not what it was. But there's a shift, and I think the characters are feminist. What I wanted to do is I wanted to say the brother's feminist. I was always very interested in men and women who worked together in the 60s and 70s as well. So the novel is partly a love letter to Karachi of the 70s, right? That's disappearing. And to that corner of Nazimabad and PIB colony, jahan sab aake Urdu speaking baith gaya tha thodi din ke liye. And Sifdain Naqvi has that wonderful essay that came out around the time that I finished the novel, right? And I was trying to give voice to that because I grew up in that milieu. So, you know, the first literary festival, so to speak, I went to was with my mother's mamu, Ikram Barelvi. I was like this high. I still have this kind of dim image. And it was an Urdu festival. Right? And I have this dim memory. So we used to call him Chunne Mamu. Of course, like all good Urdu speaking people, sab banti chunno hai. So Chunne Mamu the, and I would go and I would talk to him. And there were people, literary people like that, who from childhood kind of embraced me, right? I mean, I was a total Angrezi medium bacha in all kinds of ways. And my father would send me every now and then to mock me cards, Merry Christmas, Mary, you know, because he would mock me for it. But we spoke Urdu at home, right? And there was a really strong tradition of eloquence. But then I was interested in these men who were progressive in some ways. And so, you know, who would take me under his wing. And then there's somebody else who's mentioned in the acknowledgements. We used to call him Shaman Uncle. Papa's very dear friend. His son is sitting here, auntie's sitting here, Sayyid Mumtaz Saeed. And he embraced me and decided कि वो अजीब मतलब over the top compliments भी देते थे. But he was also telling me about a certain progressive history. So I wanted to say, you know, accounts of the culture have turned it into some kind of morass of darkness. But there were such extraordinary people who tried. And I wanted to write about them too.
One last question. Would you like to teach this novel here in Pakistan at a university?
Myself?
Yeah. You will have lots
आप बुला रही हैं?
बहुत मजेदार सवाल उठ सकते हैं.
You know, who knows? Sure. But that's okay. अब खाने पे बुलाना पड़ेगा. वो कैरी की रेसिपी मांग रही है, ज़हीर ने नहीं भेजी. You know, कब से 3 दफा मांग चुकी हूँ Facebook पे. Anyway, yes.
So, I don't have a question as such, again, like everyone else here, but it's kind of a statement because I think we're having sort of a discussion. The thing is, I'm 19 years old at the moment, right?
Sure.
And there's this entire upcoming generation in Pakistan of people that are of my age. And what everyone else, like the grown-ups, what they fail to see is that our generation has had a great deal of exposure, right? While sitting in the country. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि हमें कहीं बाहर जाना पड़ रहा है. We have social media, right? And that's a very, very powerful tool. The thing is that me being from this generation and me being somebody that speaks English and speaks Urdu as well and takes pride in it, because I see a lot of people that have just kind of brushed off Urdu to the side and they're like purposely twisting their tongues around and, you know, pronouncing the words in a wrong way, which is sad because Urdu has like a entire vast treasury of its own. The thing is that I feel like my generation feels slightly abandoned. And the reason for that is that some of the pioneers of our country, a lot of them in fact, they go abroad, right? And so ever since we're kids, we're being trained to be like, okay, so you gotta go here, you gotta go here, you gotta apply to this university, that university. मसला ये है कि हम एक वो वाहिद जनरेशन है जो खड़े हो गए हैं और ये कह रहे हैं कि okay, you know what, we need help, right? We're the only generation that has readily admitted to it, but we don't know where to go, right? So it's like a bit of my request to the people that are the grown-ups. My request is to, you know, help us through the process, because we don't know our own history, right? We're not being taught Pakistan's history or the history of our culture and our roots the correct way. And you know, you talked about the shift, about the character in your book, right? The thing is that our generation strongly feels that shift. And we're continuously going back and forth with it. And we have nobody that can guide us through it. And I know that my parents and my grandparents and all of these people, they went through partition and then they had to settle down here, and then you know, Zia happened and a lot of other stuff happened, right? So the thing is that there's just all this history. We want to know, how do we get there?
Can I say something? Because I also teach your age group. I think Sadia said something, libraries.
Yes, there are no libraries, quite literally. I have to drive like 30 minutes just to get to one.
Everything online. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, please.
Everything is available online. Read.
Yeah, but I'm going to speak as somebody who mentors intensely, right? And who works very much with young students. So I'm hearing something behind the question, if I may. Tell me if I'm wrong, right?
Okay.
Which is that, in some sense, and I could be wrong, so correct me, what you seem to be asking for, right, is less despair from the older generation,
Yes.
and less nostalgia,
Yes.
right, and more of a kind of, can we please, and I can't swear right now because it's being live streamed, but if you're in my classroom, I would be saying the F word. Can we please just move on? भाई पता है बात हम करना छोड़ दें, पता है भाई 30 जिंदगी पहले, मगर हमने रहना इसी दुनिया में, right? And there's a category that I call drawing room despair in Pakistan. कि भाई ज़यान दबा कर दिया, अब क्या करें?
It's like I was sitting with my friend's mom yesterday, and she started this lecture about sacrifice. And see, I understand where she was coming from, because that's what you're taught as, right? They're not bad people at all. But if you're being taught this certain way to think your whole life, you're going to start thinking like that. And I felt sorry for my friend, because I was like, this is not all there is to life. There's so much more. But the thing is that we're all just stuck in the past in some way, especially our grown-ups. And there is no progress whatsoever.
You know, I mean, tell them. What's stopping you? No, seriously, this is what I say to my students. Who's stopping you? Like, you've inherited this. We've given you a mess. You have to clean it up. It's true. No, I've given a speech like this after Trump was elected. I was asked by the president of the SGA to give a solidarity speech. And I said, I apologize for my generation, because we're bequeathing you a mess. And I was thinking environmentally as well, right? You're going to have to clean it up, but you're going to have to learn. And whether you do it on your own, but at that moment, you can't find the mentors. I had to find mine. Leaving the country or not. And I had some pretty bad mentors too. But leaving the country is not the issue. Because my coming back, which is what often people say to me, isn't going to resolve anything. I've tried to teach here many times. यार यहाँ पे तो कोई email ही वापस नहीं जवाब देता. Right? मुसीबत आ जाती है कि like सब कहते हैं कि आ जाओ वापस. अब कहते हैं चले आ जाते हैं. Like permanently नहीं आ सकते. I have a life there. But थोड़ी देर के लिए आ जाते हैं. The minute you say you're welcome, you're willing to work with them, that's when they don't stop responding to your emails. It's an amazing trap because they don't want you to come back. because that would be competition. What they want you to do is feel permanently embarrassed about not coming back. I've said I'll work free during my sabbatical. I've talked to people, Naiji, and I have so many friends who've done that. And Shazia here too. But I'm going to say this also. If you're not into sacrifice, then you can't ask people who found the place where they can do their work to abandon that for you. You've got to create the space for yourselves and invent the future. Read, learn, and the books are there, right? And some of us will mentor you, even across the Atlantic, but you got to do the work.
Yeah, precisely. So, any other questions? Okay, yeah.
Just one question. Sadia, I want to tell your classmate from Wellesley that she was a ferocious intellectual at high school as well. And over the years, I've noticed that she's become the scholar that she is. No, of course she is. You can see that. But over the years since high school, I've seen that she's become the scholar that you see. But today, Sadia, when you said that in your research you went through Bahishti Zevar, that's when it really hit home. The true scholar will go through the real Canaan of oppression. I just want to know, clearly people from many cultures have responded to the book. What's the culture that you found most distant from this one, from which you found a response to the book?
Well, I don't know about culture, but I mean, Americans have read it too, American friends. The blurb that I value very profoundly, one was from Annie Zaidi, who's in India, not a different culture. She's from UP and from a very prominent Urdu-speaking family, of course, there. But there's another, so I love that blurb. I never met her, but it was such a sensitive blurb. But there was another one too, which was from my colleague John Keane. And I think John Keane is one of the greatest writers right now. He's an African-American writer of extraordinary intellect, experimental courage, tremendous intelligence, and an ability. He's written a book called Counter Narratives, which is exquisitely written. And he calls it a mixtape, right? And so there are different voices all the way through. And it's what I think of the collection of stories as a history of colonial modernity and race, starting from settlement in Manhattan, which is the first story said, and up to the implosion of Pan-Africanism in Africa, post-colonialism. But each story is a kind of incredible, intense exploration of a certain space and contradiction, but with a completely different voice. And so when I offered to blurb the book, I was also terrified, because he is just such an extraordinary writer, right? I teach his work. And I also truly believe, and I say this to anybody who agrees to read the work, be honest about it. Don't tell me that you like it just for the sake of it. I'm not easily intimidated, and I have sufficient confidence, right, that I can defend my arguments and corner and choices. But I also don't want people to pat me on the head or out of a friendship say something. And when he actually said that he liked it, and he called it a gem and a marvel to me, and agreed to be in conversation with me at NYU at the invitation of Fred Moten, who's this great black critical theorist, I felt like this was the ultimate compliment, because it was strange to them. But there are also people who have both of whom have a very profound experimental sense of language, right? And their respect meant something extraordinary. So, I mean, I'm always kind of like, seriously, really? You really mean that? Oh my God. But yeah, I'd say some of my great Black American friends who have read it and actually said what they mean, that means more to me than anything else, in some ways.
So I guess we can thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sadia. You did great despite the odds. And once again, thank you very much. Please, the books are available if you want to get one. And best of luck, Sadia, for the next one.